And I think a year ago or so, a lot of people will say, well, who does that describe who's very likely to be a candidate? Rand Paul, but that doesn't seem to have applied to him yet. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think there's no question that there is a tremendous hunger out there for something new. They're sick of the system, and they want to shake things up, and I think that's something that really ultimately does play to the senator's credit. And as you mentioned, a year ago, that was something that was maybe very strongly associated with him. The reality is, and John talked about it quite a bit, it's a fluid race. I mean, things go up, things go down. You might have seen some of the news just breaking now about Governor Walker, and is he going to get out of the race tonight? And this was a guy who a couple months ago was in first place. And so it's an incredibly fluid race, and that's just how it's historically always been. You look 4 years ago, he talked about with Rick, if you go 4 years ago in August in first place, Michelle Bachmann was in first. In September, Rick Perry was in first. In October, Herman Cain was in first. Then it was Newt Gingrich. And none of those folks even finished in the top two in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. 4 years before that, you had right now Huckabee and McCain were in single digits. They win Iowa and New Hampshire to be the nominee. 4 years before that, you had Howard Dean up by a bigger margin than Trump for 7 months, up by double digits a week out from Iowa, and he loses by 20. So this is sort of this is how these things go, and that's what makes it a lot of fun. If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Now, another factor people will raise with you guys that's shaped the environment in a way that's perhaps been difficult to deal with is it seemed with the beheading of James Foley a year ago that public opinion really shifted in a more hawkish direction, certainly among Republicans. And a lot of people think that's made it harder going for Rand than they would have thought. So, one, do you accept the premise that there's that shift in public sentiment? And two, has it made the sledding tougher for the campaign?
Well, Rand, he follows the Ronald Reagan foreign policy doctrine of peace through strength. And so he believes that America should have the greatest military in the world and shouldn't be afraid to protect American interests. But that also doesn't mean that we should be for intervention for the sake of intervention. He did oppose unnecessary interventions in Libya, and he opposed the arming of Al-Qaeda, ISIS's allies in Syria. And the reality is ISIS fights us with Western arms. And we have to be very careful in our foreign policy approach and have a responsible foreign policy to keep America safe.
But did you feel that shift in public opinion? Do you think that's a real thing?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to talk to the sort of politicization of beheadings. I think that everybody is concerned about national security, as they should be, and as Rand is.
Well, it's not that the beheading itself is politicized. It's just that after people saw that and were appalled by it, you looked at the numbers, and even for ground troops, in theory, to fight ISIS, in some polls you've seen majority support for that, I believe, which seems to be a issue environment that's much different than immediately after the end of the Bush years, when there was really a reaction on the right. We were involved too much. These interventions didn't work out. We can't do nation building.
Well, Rand thinks, we need to have boots on the ground. It should be Arab boots on the ground. I mean, that's the area that it most impacts, and that we don't want to send sort of our young men and women to go and die. And the reality is that that's where a lot of Americans are, and that's really where the classic sort of Republican foreign policy has been historically.
So I hate to do this to you, but let's talk a little bit more about Trump. A few weeks ago, Rand really began to go after him hammer and tongs, and the result of that seemed not to be evident and certainly didn't seem to help Rand. What was the thinking behind that tactic? Are you guys going to keep it up going forward? What's your thought on that?
Well, it's interesting. Nate Silver at 538 about a few weeks ago did an analysis of the media coverage out there, and they found that Trump was getting more coverage than all the other candidates combined. So that's an extraordinary share of voice in the race. So if you're not engaging Trump, then you just risk sort of completely falling out of the conversation. And if he's going to be the front runner, then we need to have a conversation about what that means as a party and where we stand. So I think that's really about, jump-starting that conversation.
So it wasn't something that Senator Paul particularly expected to gain from. It's just something that you guys considered necessary given Trump's status in the race.
Well, I think that Rand speaks from the heart, and he speaks about the things that he cares about, and I think that he worries about, you know, having somebody that, I think there's many parts of Trump's record that are concerning to lots of conservatives out there, and that it's worth, primaries are the time to litigate those things.
So there are people who will tell you in Iowa, and to be honest, most of them are associated with Ted Cruz, but they'll tell you that Ted Cruz has been able to eat into Rand Paul's libertarian support out there. Do you think there's any truth to that, and how's Iowa lining up for you?
Well, I'm sure Ted Cruz would tell you that Ted Cruz is doing very well, and I wouldn't blame him for that. No, I think things line up very well for us in Iowa. I mean, the reality is, you take a look at the Iowa caucuses. So caucuses put disproportionate value on passion and organization, which are things that we do very well at. There's 131,000 people who participated in the Iowa caucuses 4 years ago. There are 120,000 students in Iowa. 4 years ago, Ron Paul finished 3,803 votes short of winning the caucuses, and they were January 3rd. Why is that significant? Winter break. This time it's February 1st. This will be the first time in over a decade the caucuses have occurred when school is in session, when students are going to be around. So you look at that math, and you can see how much opportunity there is out there. And so no, there's caucuses and organization and student strength. Those are where we are very well positioned.
So in other words, some of those kids who are at CPAC every year and love Rand Paul and make him the winner of the straw poll every year are going to be in school in Iowa.
Yes,
at
absolutely.
the time of the caucuses. How do you reach them?
It's interesting. Iowa has double the population of New Hampshire, but half the participants because it's a caucus state. And when you look at how many students are there, Iowa also, it's not one of the bigger states, but yet it's got schools like University of Iowa, Iowa State. Those are two Big 10, Big 12 schools. Those are two of the biggest schools in the country. And so there's a massive student population there. It's very disproportionate student strength. You were mentioning the CPAC straw poll. Just this past weekend was the Mackinac straw poll, which is since they canceled the Iowa straw poll, actually, the Mackinac straw polls, this was the biggest straw poll of the year so far. And just this past weekend, and Rand Paul won that. He finished just ahead of Carly Fiorina, who Carly obviously was riding away from the debate last week, and yet we still won that. That's indicative of the strength of our organization and the passion felt for us among our supporters.
Talk a little bit about a particular aspect of that organization, because something that Ron Paul was kind of pioneer at was the digital, the online, the email organizing. How have you guys followed that up and taken the ball further down the field?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is if Republicans are going to be competitive, this isn't as simple as we need to go capture what Obama did digitally. If Republicans next year do what Obama did, then we're going to lose. There's going to be a whole evolution in digital, and we're running the Savviest Best Digital campaign. It's a crowdsourced digital campaign. We're the only campaign that has released our logo as a vector file. We're the only campaign that has, we have bumper sticker and T-shirt design contests. We're putting out videos every single week. We're the first candidate to do a Snapchat interview. We did a Periscope interview, doing all these different things. We have millions of followers between Twitter and Facebook. So we have a real emphasis on it. I mean, the reality is that Facebook and a lot of these digital things, they've become the 21st century door knock.
So the other side of the coin in these kind of campaigns is big dollar fundraising, and there have been reports out there that Senator Paul doesn't necessarily like doing that so much, which I wouldn't blame him for. I would hate doing myself, but is that true?
No, Senator Paul, listen, I've been working on political campaigns. My first cycle was 2000. There's a lot of candidates out there who, this is one of the important parts of a political campaign. It's not, and he works at it and he does it. He makes his calls. Those are stories put out by bad guys, but the reality is
Do you want to name names of the bad guys?
No, it's just, that's all just part of the sort of the process stories that people are into. But no, he does the necessary things to be successful.
Now, John, just before he came on, was talking about how everyone is running against a certain set of other candidates and not necessarily the rest of the field. Do you think that's true? And if so, who's Rand Paul running against?
I think we are just running against ourselves.
Okay.
I think we've got. I mean, I think the reality is that the country has nearly intractable problems, and I think people they want a bold, transformational leader, and I think Senator Paul is that person, and that means just getting out there and talking about our flat tax, our plan to balance the budget, his support of term limits, and requiring Congress to read the bills. I think we do those things, then we're in great shape.
Now, he is real hell, obviously, on career politicians. Some critics, though, look at the maneuverings that happened in Kentucky so he could run both for president and for Senate by changing from a primary and caucus and say, well, if there's anything that would define a typical career politician type move, that would be it.
Well, the reality is if you look at most, it's been pretty common in presidential elections for things like that to occur. You look just 4 years ago, Paul Ryan, when he ran for vice president, he was running for vice president while simultaneously running for re-election to the House. 4 years before that, you had Joe Biden running for re-election to the Senate. And I mean, it's actually a fairly common thing. It's not unusual.
But I think that's making my point, something politicians do all the time.
Well, I mean, is Paul Ryan a typical politician? I mean, I think
He doesn't claim not to be a career politician, I don't think.
Well, I think that'll be up to folks, the voters, to decide. But I don't think anybody would ever classify Rand Paul as a conventional politician.
So are you privy to how often he talks to Ron? And does Ron ever give him advice and say, hey, son, this is how it's really done?
Well, Ron's been out a few times. I mean, he was at our announcement speech. They saw each other. Rand was in Texas a month or so ago doing some fundraising, and Ron was there at an event. So just 2 weekends ago, they saw each other in St. Louis at an event where Rand's mom received an award from Eagle Forum. So they see each other from time to time.
So let me ask you the two questions that I want to ask everyone at the end. Is there any moment from another candidate or campaign where you've thought, that was smart, that was shrewd, gosh, we should have thought about that? And what is the most endearing Rand Paul quality that the rest of us might not be aware of?
Well, I think there have been several moments. I think that there have been, several really good campaigns that are out there. I mean, I think the way Carly handled Trump and the remark that Trump had made about her appearance, I thought that was well done.
Yeah, she really cut his balls off with the precision of a surgeon.
I thought, Carson's, his closing statement from 2 debates ago, that was well done. I think Rubio's announcement was well done. I think there's been a number of opportunities that people have done well. And as for Rand and endearing qualities, I think the fact that for about 20 years he's done free eye surgeries. As you know, he's an ophthalmologist and he's an eye surgeon, and he's been doing charitable ones. I mean,
I hear from Donald Trump he's an okay.
This year he went to Haiti. Last year he went to Guatemala to do it charitably. And so I think that speaks to his heart and his passion.
And how long have you known him?
Have I known Rand?
Yeah.
I've known him for a few years. In cycles past, he had supported some candidates that I worked for. But really, working day and know so well, really less than a year.
Great. Well, Chip, thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good luck.